Hello, fellow travelers of Middle-earth. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden secrets of Tolkien's world, please like this video and subscribe to join our fellowship of truth seekers of Pale, moon hung above the ancient ruins of Weathertop, casting long shadows across weathered stone. The night air carried an unnatural chill, far colder than autumn should permit. At the summit of the once mighty watchtower of a Monsel stood a figure robed in gray, his beard silvered by moonlight, his eyes fixed upon the eastern horizon. Gandalf the Grey waited, not in ambush, as the histories would later claim, not in surprise, as he would tell the hobbits. He waited with purpose, with knowledge, with dread certainty of what approached. He comes. The wizard whispered to the night from the east. A darkness moved against the darkness, a shadow within shadow, crowned with steel and malice. The Witch King of Onmar approached alone, his black robes undisturbed by the rising wind. No mount carried him this night, no lesser. Ringwraiths accompanied their lord. This meeting required privacy. The hour is appointed, spoke a voice like stone grinding against metal, hollow, yet terribly present. You have brought it. Gandalf's hand tightened around his staff, but he made no move toward Glandering at his side. I have brought knowledge. Only, he answered as we agreed. Knowledge, the wraith hissed the words stretching into the night. Knowledge. Forbidden, all knowledge is forbidden to someone, Gandalf countered. Yet here we stand, servant of darkness and servant of light, both seeking the same truth. The Witch King moved closer, and frost formed upon the ancient stones beneath his feet. Speak the words, he commanded, speak the binding oath that neither shall betray this meeting to our masters. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. I serve no master. A sound emerged from the darkness beneath the Witch King's hood, a terrible approximation of laughter. So you believe Olorin? The wizard stiffened at the use of his true name. One that no servant of the enemy should know. In that moment, beneath the cold stars above Weathertop, Gandalf began to understand the true depth of what he had stumbled upon. This was no simple enemy, no mere servant of Sauron. The Witch King carried knowledge that threatened the very foundations of the coming war. I discovered the scroll in the forgotten archive, Gandalf said carefully, the one written in blood upon human skin. It speaks of the void beyond the void of the master, whom even Sauron fears. The Witch King raised a gauntlet hand, and I have brought the key to its translation. Together we shall read what was never meant to be read. Why would you betray your lord in this? Gandalf asked, though in his heart an impossible suspicion was taking root. The Witch King moved closer still, and when he spoke again, his terrible voice had changed, carrying now an echo of something anciently human, something desperate. Because Sauron believes he shall rule. When the darkness comes, he is wrong. When the true master returns, all shall be consumed, both light and lesser darkness. Even you, Mithrandir, for all your wisdom, do not comprehend what awakens beyond the walls of night. From within his robes, the Witch King produced an object wrapped in cloth of midnight blue, embroidered with silver stars that seemed to glow with their own cold light. This night changes everything, the wraith said. After what we shall learn together, nothing in Middle-earth shall proceed as foreseen, not by elf wisdom, not by your white counsel, not by my dark master. And Mordor. Gandalf felt fear, then true fear beyond any he had known in 2,000 years of walking the lands of Middle-earth. But with that fear came certainty. He must see what the Witch King had brought. The fate of all free peoples might depend upon this forbidden knowledge. Then let us begin, Gandalf said, and stepped forward to seal a pact that history would never record. A secret that would alter the course of the War of the Ring before it had even begun, but what happened in the hours that followed would remain unspoken, hidden behind half-truths and deliberate omissions. Until now, for I have found the missing pieces scattered across forgotten scrolls and whispered rumors. I have uncovered the truth of what transpired between the great wizard and the lord of the Nazgul upon Weathertop, and why both conspired to keep it secret from their allies and enemies alike. The forbidden truth shall now be revealed. Weathertop stood as a silent sentinel above the rolling hills of the ancient kingdom of Anna, its broken crown of stone a remnant of glory long faded. Once called Ammon, saw the Hill of Wind. It had housed one of the greatest treasures of the northern kingdom, a seeing stone, a palantir of immense power, though the watchtower now lay in ruins. The power lingering there could not be denied by those sensitive to such things. The Third Age had seen much blood spilled upon these stones. It was here that the last king of Anna made his final stand against the Witch King nearly 1,000 years past. It was here that the great kingdom fractured, leaving only memories and abandoned fortresses scattered across what would become the Lone Lands. And it was here upon this hill of ancient significance that powers beyond mortal understanding would converge on a chill autumn night. Gandalf the Grey had walked the paths of Middle-earth for over 2,000 years, known by many names: Mithrand to the elves, Farin to the dwarves and Connies in the south, and Gandalf to the men of the north. He had ever been a wanderer, one of 5 Istari sent from across the western sea. His purpose had always been to guide and advise, never to dominate or command. Yet behind his humble appearance lay power that had not been fully unleashed since his arrival upon these shores. Few knew his true nature as a mayor, a spirit of the same order as Sauron himself, though lesser in stature than the great powers of Arda. Fewer still understood the constraints placed upon him by the Valar, the limitations that prevented him from wielding his full might against the darkness growing in the east. He was bound to counsel rather than command, to inspire rather than impose. This was his burden and his strength. The Witch King of Angmar, eldest and most terrible of the 9 Ringeths, had once been a great king of men, perhaps the greatest of the 9 kings who had accepted the rings of power from Sauron's own hand. His name had been struck from all records as history, erased by time and deliberate action. Now he existed as a dreadful shadow of his former self, bound eternally to the will of the Dark Lord, or so all believed. What few scholars understood was that the Witch King retained knowledge from his mortal days, secrets of ancient sorcery practiced in realms now swallowed by the sea. He had been a student of forbidden arts long before Sauron presented him with his ring of power. These arts had drawn the Dark Lord's attention, made him an ideal vessel for Sauron's designs. Yet something of his original will remain buried beneath layers of darkness and compulsion. The history commonly told speaks of confrontation upon Weathertop, a brief but terrible battle between the Grey Pilgrim and the Lord of the Nazgûl. It tells of Gandalf, outnumbered by the 9, lighting a great fire upon the hilltop and escaping in the confusion. A tale of desperate resistance, nothing more. But certain texts in the hidden libraries of Minas Tirith tell a different story. Ancient weather record from the Rangers of the North note an unusual phenomenon. That night, a perfect circle of clouds above Weathertop, rotating slowly against the prevailing winds. The accounts of travelers who witnessed strange lights from afar describe not the chaotic flashes of battle, but steady rhythmic pulses of brilliance alternating between blinding White and deepest purple, most telling, was the testimony of birds the great eagles reported to Gwa, their wind lord, that no creature could approach the hill that night, neither beast nor bird. An invisible boundary surrounded Weathertop, extending a league in all directions. Within this boundary silence reigned absolute. Such a working required tremendous power, yes, but more importantly, it required cooperation between the powers that established it. The timing, too, cannot be dismissed as coincidence. 5 days after this encounter, the waters of the Brennan rose against the Nazgul, an event commonly attributed solely to Elrond's power. Yet ancient elven accounts mention Elrond's surprise at the river's unusual response exceeding what he had intended, as if some other influence had strengthened the water's rejection of the servants of Sauron. 3 days before the meeting, Gandalf had visited the ruins of Fernost's ancient capital. Of Aenir no record explains his purpose there, but the rangers noted his unusual solemnity. Upon departing, he carried with him a small box of Adawud, a material known for its ability to contain magical energies. The box was not with him when he arrived at Rivendell after Weathertop. The Witch King, for his part, had detoured from the direct route to the Shire, spending precious hours in the Barrow Downs before resuming the hunt for the ring. The official records state he sought to awaken the Barrow Wights to aid in the search, yet no new wights arose during that time. Instead, something was removed from the central Barrow, something that had lain untouched since the downfall of Cardolan. These scattered pieces of historical context do not form a complete picture, but they cast long shadows of doubt upon the accepted narrative. They suggest preparation rather than chance collaboration, rather than conflict. They hint at a convergence of powers drawn together by knowledge so dangerous that both light and darkness might temporarily find common cause. For there existed a third force in the equation, one neither Gandalf nor the Witch King served a power older than Sauron, older perhaps than Auror itself, stirring once more beyond the walls of night. Its name appears in no history, save one, a single manuscript locked in the deepest vault of Minas, tith written in a script so ancient that only 3 beings in Middle-earth could still decipher it. The manuscript speaks of the time before time, when darkness was not yet corrupt and light not yet formed. It speaks of an entity that was cast out before the music of the Ainur, whose discordant notes can still be heard by those with ears to listen, an entity that even Morgoth, first Dark Lord and Master of Sauron, had feared. It was this manuscript that brought Gandalf to Weathertop that night, and it was knowledge of this entity that compelled the Witch King to meet him there away from the watchful eye of his master in Mordor, for prophecy had long foretold that no man could kill the Lord of the Nazgul. What it did not reveal was the terrible reason why this protection had been granted, and the price that would one day come due. The official account of what transpired at Weathertop appears in the Red Book of West March, drawn from Gandalf's own telling to Frodo and his companions at the Council of Eland. According to this version, Gandalf was surrounded by the Nine upon the hilltop, fighting alone against overwhelming darkness. He described a desperate battle, culminating in a brilliant flash of white flame. Before he escaped into the night, I was on the hilltop at sunset. Gandalf reportedly said, I was surrounded in the dark. I could not see, but I could feel their presence. I needed light. And so I made a flame. The hill was lit with a tremendous flash. They were upon me, and I was alone. I was hard put to it, but in the end, I escaped. Words carefully chosen, each one technically truthful, Yet misleading in their arrangement, Gandalf indeed stood alone upon Weathertop at sunset. He indeed felt the presence of darkness approaching. He indeed created light, but the nature of that light and its purpose remained unspoken. Examination of the hilltop in the days following revealed peculiar evidence that contradicts the tale of chaotic battle the rangers who ventured there found. Not the scattered marks of combat, but precise patterns burned into the stone. A perfect circle encompassed the summit with intricate symbols etched at the 4 cardinal points. Within this circle lay another, and at its center a symbol unknown to the rangers, complex and troubling to look upon. More curious still were the objects left behind: a broken dagger of westernness, its blade inscribed with spells against the forces of Angmar, yet deliberately snapped at the hilt; a silver pendant bearing the white tree of Gundor, partially melted as if exposed to tremendous heat; 5 black feathers arranged in a star pattern; a small vial of clear liquid that evaporated when exposed to sunlight; and strangest of all, a single perfect crystal that seemed to hold a star within its depths. None of these artifacts were mentioned in Gandalf's account. None appeared in any official record of the encounter. They were gathered by the rangers and delivered to Rivendell, where they vanished from history. No mention of them appears in any elven record, suggesting a deliberate suppression of their existence. The few witnesses who observed Weathertop from afar that night tell a story at odds with the official narrative. A merchant traveling the East Road reported seeing not chaotic flashes of battle, but a sustained column of light rising from the hill into the heavens, lasting for hours. A shepherd tending his flock near the Weather Hills described strange music carried on the wind, neither elven nor human in origin, that filled him with both dread and inexplicable hope. Most compelling is the testimony of Radagast the Brown, who encountered Gandalf on the road 3 days after Weathertop. Though the brown wizard seldom involved himself in the great matters of Middle-earth, preferring the company of birds and beasts, his account survives in a letter sent to Saruman, later preserved in the archives of Ysgoddard. I found Mithrandir upon the Greenway. Radagast wrote he was changed there. Was about him a gravity I had not seen before, as one who has looked upon something not meant for mortal eyes. When I asked of his journey, he spoke of Weathertop only briefly, claiming weariness from battle with the Nine, yet no wound marked him, and the birds that accompany me everywhere would not approach him. They whispered of shadow and light mingled in ways unnatural. When I pressed him further, he asked if I still possessed the key to the Western cipher, that ancient code developed by Melon in the First Age. When I confirmed that I did, he grew silent and would speak no more of Weathertop. The Western cipher Radagast mentioned was a method of concealing messages within seemingly ordinary text, known only to the Astari and certain high elves. It had been created specifically to hide information from the servants of darkness. That Gandalf inquired about it immediately after Weathertop suggests information of tremendous sensitivity had come into his possession. The Nazgul, for their part, behaved strangely. In the aftermath of Weathertop, they did not immediately resume their hunt for the ring, but scattered briefly, each riding in a different direction before regrouping. Days later, rangers reported seeing the Witch King himself standing motionless upon a hill far to the east, as if listening to some distant call. When he rejoined his fellows, their pursuit of the ring-bearer took on a strange quality, alternating between relentless hunting and inexplicable delays. Perhaps most telling were the dreams that afflicted both elves and men in the nights. Following the encounter at Weathertop in Rivendell, Elrond spoke of visions of a great eye not wreathed in flame, as was Sauron's symbol, but an eye of perfect darkness rimmed with stars, and breathing innkeeper Barlaam Butterba found himself dreaming of a tower taller than the sky, its foundations deeper than the roots of mountains, and in his cell in Gondor, the mad prophet Malbath awakened screaming of the void that hungers and the darkness between. The stars such dreams might be dismissed as coincidence were it not for one crucial detail. Each dreamer reported awakening with the same phrase upon their lips, a phrase in a language none of them knew or could later recall. Only when the words were written down and compared did the pattern emerge. Each had spoken the same 8 words in the ancient tongue of Numer, a phrase that translates roughly to when the bounded is unbound, both light and shadow, and these documented facts scattered across various accounts and deliberately obscured from direct connection form a constellation pointing toward a truth more complex than a simple battle between good and evil. They suggest a meeting with purpose and exchange of critical information and measures taken by both parties to conceal the true nature of their interaction, but to understand why a servant of light and a servant of darkness would risk such a meeting. We must look deeper into the ancient prophecies that bound both Gandalf and the Witch King to their respective paths, and the looming threat that may have temporarily aligned their interests against a common doom. The stones of Weathertop hold memories beyond those recorded in any book. In the months following the encounter, rangers patrolling the area discovered strange markings appearing on the ancient ruined symbols that seemed to emerge from within the stone itself, rather than being carved upon it. These markings corresponded to no known language of elf, man, or dwarf yet. They possessed a terrible symmetry that suggested deliberate communication. A ranger captain named Halbeard Kinsman to Aragorn made careful copies of these symbols before they faded with the first winter frost. He delivered these copies to Rivendell, noting in his journal that the very act of tracing these marks filled me with unease, as though I transcribed words never meant for mortal understanding. The copies disappeared into Elrond's private study and were never seen again. Yet one symbol among those copied found its way elsewhere, a perfect circle bisected by a vertical line with 3 stars positioned above this exact mark appeared months later in Gandalf's own handwriting, scratched hastily in the margin of a letter to Círdan at the Grey Havens. When questioned about it by the shipwright, Gandalf claimed it was merely an absent-minded doodle. Círdan, who had known Gandalf since his arrival in Middle-earth 2,000 years before, noted that in all that time he had never once seen the wizard doodle. More telling was the 5-day absence of Gandalf following Weathertop. The official account states he traveled directly to Rindal after escaping the Nazgul, yet records in Bree confirm he did not pass that way until 5 days after the night at Weathertop, despite the journey requiring only 3 days on foot. Where was Gandalf during those missing days? No record exists to answer this question, but a curious report from woodsmen near the Troll shores tells of strange lights moving beneath the earth, visible through cracks in the stone of a hillside where 3 trolls had once been turned to stone. This same hillside contained ancient caves that predated even the elves' awakening in Middle-earth, caves that Gandalf had once explored with Thorin's company on their journey to Arab caves, said to contain writings from the earliest days of Ardora. When the Valor themselves walked the new-formed earth, the Witch King's movements during the same period reveal their own inconsistencies, according to thee. Accounts Frodo received all 9 rings, pursued him from Weathertop to the ford of Brennan, yet multiple reliable witnesses in the Lone Lands reported seeing only 8 Black Riders moving east. The Witch King himself seemed to have temporarily separated from his fellows. A merchant traveling the east road swore that he encountered a tall figure in black standing alone by the roadside. Near dawn 5 days after the night, at Weathertop, the figure asked him a single question: does the lights still shine upon the western shore? When the merchant, puzzled, replied that he supposed it did, the figure seemed to relax, saying only then there is still time, before vanishing into the morning mist. This question, innocuous to the merchant's ears, carried profound significance to any verse in the ancient lore of Numer. The light upon the western shore referred to Avalon, the easternmost city of tall Erica, whose tower bore a great light visible from the coast of Numer before its downfall. That light symbolized the connection between mortal realms and the undying lands, a connection severed with Numer's destruction. For the Witch King, once a lord of Numer, before accepting Sauron's ring to inquire about this light, suggested a momentary reconnection with his mortal origins, a brief resurfacing of the man he had been before darkness consumed him. Perhaps most disturbing among the clues was the discovery made in Rivendell's library after Gandalf's departure with the Fellowship. A book of ancient prophecies dating from the early Second Age was found. Open upon a reading table, certain passages underlined in red ink. The book itself was unremarkable, containing mostly well-known predictions about the tides of darkness and light in Middle-earth, but the underlined passages, when read together, formed a narrative previously overlooked. They spoke of a time when the servant shall remember he was once a master, and the counselor shall become a commander. They mentioned the joining of flame and shadow against the hunger beyond, and warned that when the 9 become 8 and the 5 become 4, the third shall awaken. These cryptic lines gained terrible significance when viewed alongside another clue: Gandalf's staff. The wizards of Middle-earth carried staves as symbols of their authority and focuses for their power. Gandalf's staff had for centuries been a gnarled length of hardwood, unadorned save for a slight crystal setting near its top, but observers at the Council of Eland noted a change. The staff now bore faint inscriptions along its length, writing so small and fine that it could not be read without close inspection. No one thought to make such an inspection until after Gandalf's fall in Moria. Then, when his possessions were gathered and prepared to be held in his memory, Aragorn noticed the tiny script that spiraled around the staff in an unbroken line, written in a variant of Quenya so ancient that even struggled to translate portions of it. What they could decipher spoke of boundaries between worlds, of the nature of the void, and of bindings placed upon powers in the earliest days of creation. The final section contained a warning: should the Nameless return, all oaths are unmade. This phrase matched exactly one found in the private papers of the Witch King, discovered centuries earlier in the ruins of Kandum by an expedition from Gondor and locked away in the deepest vaults of Minis. These scattered clues formed a constellation pointing toward a disturbing possibility that both Gandalf and the Witch King had become aware of some third force, some threat greater than the conflict between Sauron and the free peoples of Middle-earth, a threat that may have caused these ancient enemies to briefly set aside their enmity, to address a common danger, but what could possibly represent a threat greater than Sauron himself? The answer lay partially in the most overlooked detail of all, hidden in plain sight within the very name Gandalf used for his greatest foe in all his long years in Middle-earth. Gandalf rarely spoke the name Sauron aloud. Instead, he referred to the Dark Lord as the enemy, or the Nameless One. Yet Sauron was not nameless. His name was known, recorded in countless texts, and spoken fearfully throughout the land. So, who then was the truly nameless one to whom Gandalf referred in his private writings? Who was the enemy? That even the enemy feared. The answer to this question would begin to emerge during the secret conversation atop Weathertop A. Conversation that would shake the foundations of everything both Gandalf and the Witch King believed about their place in the cosmic order of Middle-earth. The wind fell silent over Weathertop as Gandalf and the Witch King faced one another in the growing darkness. No record exists of their exact words, yet through fragments of evidence, ancient texts, and the subsequent actions of both beings, we can reconstruct the substance of their exchange, a dialogue never meant for other ears. You came alone. Gandalf observed, his voice steady despite. Standing before the most terrible servant of the enemy, the Witch King's response came as a whisper that seemed to emerge from the air itself rather than from beneath his dark hood. As did you, Olin, no white council observes us, no lesser wraiths attend me. You know that name, Gandalf said, surprised briefly, overcoming his caution. How would a servant of Sauron know my true name? A sound like distant thunder emanated from the Witch King. Perhaps, laughter, I knew your name before Sauron claimed me before. This shadow was forced upon me. I was once among the learned of Númenor, keeper of the Star-Lord. I read of the mirror in texts brought from the undying lands. Gandalf's grip tightened on his staff. What remains of that lawmaster? Now and nothing but a wraith bound to darkness. Is that what you believe? The Witch King moved forward, frost crystallizing on the stone beneath his feet. That I am merely Sauron's puppet, I who is studying the music of creation while your precious hobbits were still learning to farm the earth. And why serve him? The same reason you serve your hidden masters in the West. Because we are bound, because we have no choice. The wraith extended a gauntlet hand, black metal gleaming dully in the fading light. But bonds can be broken, or only especially when something comes that was never accounted for in the music. Gandalf remained still, neither retreating nor advancing. Speak plainly. What have you discovered that warranted this meeting? Not discovered, remembered. The Witch King's voice dropped lower still. In the dungeons beneath Minas Morgul, I found a chamber sealed since before the foundation of Barad-dûr. Within it lay a palantir unlike the seven made for the men of Númenor. This stone was older, darker, its visions not of distant places, but of distant times. A dangerous artifact, Gandalf said carefully. Such things are often trapped. Indeed, the trap was sprung long ago. When Sauron himself attempted to master it, he failed. The stone shattered. His concentration forced him to see what he had forgotten. In his lust for dominion, the wraith paused. He saw what comes after his victory. Should he achieve it, he saw what waits beyond the walls of night, growing stronger with each passing age. Gandalf's expression hardened. The nameless. So you do know? The Witch King's shoulders straightened, as if a great suspicion had been confirmed. The true enemy, older than Morgoth, older than Ardor itself, the void that hungers. I have suspected, Gandalf admitted reluctantly. There are passages in the oldest texts that speak of a discord before the music began, a note that was silenced but not destroyed. I believe them metaphorical. There not. The nameless was cast out before the creation of Ea, but not unmade. It cannot be unmade for it. Is the shadow of Iluvatar himself the doubt, before certainty the void before creation. And now it stirs again, reaching through the thinning places between worlds. Gandalf was silent for a long moment, weighing the Wraith's words against centuries of his own research and suspicion. Finally he asked, "Why tell me this? What does Sauron's most faithful servant gain by revealing such knowledge?" The Witch King's response came with unexpected heat. "Faithful, I who have died 1,000 deaths in his service, I who remember what it was to be a king of men, a scholar of father I serve, because this cursed ring binds me to his will, not out of loyalty." He continued, voice lowering to a hiss. "Zuron believes the nameless will elevate him. When it returns, make him a god in truth, rather than merely in his own mind. He is a fool. The nameless devours all light and darkness alike. I have seen this truth in the shattered Palantir. I have heard the void speaking my true name, offering freedom if I would only help it enter our world. And now you fear this entity." Gandalf concluded. Fear, the Witch King's laugh was like ice cracking. "I have lived in fear for 3,000 years, wizard. This is not fear, this is clarity. When a nameless comes, even death will provide no escape for me. My spirit, bound by the ring, will not pass beyond the circles of the world, but be consumed, experiencing an eternity of unmaking." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "So this is about saving yourself. It is about saving everything." The Witch King counted. "Even your precious light cannot withstand what comes the prophecy of my fall, that no man can kill me. It was never protection. It was a prison sentence ensuring I would remain to witness the end." The wizard considered this. "What do you propose? Then I cannot free you from Sauron's service. The ring binds you until its destruction, not freedom." Knowledge. The Witch King reached within his robes and withdrew an object wrapped in cloth. "I bring you the key to the western cipher, the code hidden within the Book of Stars. With it, you can read what the last scholars of Numer discovered about the nameless and the 7 gates that keep it at bay. And in exchange, you will bring me the words of unmaking the spell recorded in the hidden chamber beneath Orthanc. Saruman believes it a weapon against Sauron. He is wrong. It is a binding meant for something far older." Gandalf's brow furrowed. "How do you know of this?" "Because I helped write it in my mortal life. My knowledge, combined with elven magic, created a seal that would hold back the nameless for another age. But the words alone are not enough. They must be spoken by voices from both light and shadow at the moment when the stars align, as they did at the creation of Ardora. A dangerous collaboration." Gandalf said quietly. "More dangerous is doing nothing." The Witch King replied, "Already the signs manifest dreams of an eye rimmed with stars, cold fire that burns without consuming, animals fleeing from forests where no predator hunts the dead, stirring not at Sauron's command, but from some deeper calling." Gandalf fell silent, weighing the words against his suspicions. Finally he spoke. "I will not take what you offer. Yet first prove your words have substance. Tell me something about the nameless that I cannot possibly know, something that I can verify independently." The Witch King nodded slowly. "It has many names and many tongues, but all mean the same thing. The hunger between stars and the deepest chambers of Khazard doomed. The dwarves carved warnings of it in stone, though they knew not what they warned against. They wrote, deeper than deeps, where no light has shone, that which unmakes waits to unmake. All look there if you dare, but do not delve too greedily, as Duran's folk did. What they awakened was not merely a Balrog. With these words, the true substance of their meeting began to take shape for the next several hours beneath a sky wheeling with silent stars. A servant of light and a servant of darkness exchanged forbidden knowledge, each seeking to verify the other's claims, each reluctantly coming to accept the terrible truth. They both served causes that were merely pieces in a larger game, one that had been playing out since before the beginning of time itself. By dawn they had reached an accord, though not one. Either would have willingly chosen the Witch King departed eastward, carrying with him certain knowledge that would alter his pursuit of the ring. Gandalf remained on Weathertop until sunset, deep in troubled thought, before setting out on his 5-day journey to the hidden cave beneath the troll shores. Neither spoke of their meeting afterward, save in the most cryptic terms. Neither fully trusted the other, yet both understood that the fate of all things, from the greatest of the valor to the smallest creatures of Middle-earth, might depend upon their reluctant cooperation against an enemy that threatened to unmake the very foundations of reality itself. Beneath the surface of the War of the Ring lay currents far deeper and more ancient than the struggle between Sauron and the free peoples of Middle-earth. The White Council, formed to counter the growing shadow in the East, operated with a hidden directive known only to its oldest members, one not shared even with Sauron, its leader. This directive, established by Galadriel and Círdan at the Council's founding, concerned not Sauron, but what might follow should he be defeated. For the wisest of the Eldar remembered the pattern of darkness in Middle-earth. Each Dark Lord had been but a lieutenant of the one before, each rising greater than the last. Morgoth had been the master of Sauron, but who had been the master of Morgoth? This question haunted the margins of the oldest texts, hinted it, but never directly addressed. Gandalf knew of this directive, carried it as his primary mission, though he spoke of it to no one. His constant wandering, often dismissed by others as aimless, followed a careful pattern established over centuries. He visited ancient sites of power, places where the boundaries between worlds had grown thin. He collected law not just about Sauron, but about the foundations of artery itself, about the nature of the void from which all things have been made. The Witch King bound to Sauron's will through the ring he had accepted, nevertheless maintained certain freedoms within the constraints of his servitude. Chief among these was the pursuit of knowledge. As Sauron's most trusted lieutenant, he had access to dark lore gathered over thousands of years, texts and artifacts stolen from fallen kingdoms, secrets gleaned from the torture of immortal beings. Within this forbidden library, hidden in the deepest chambers of Minas Morgul, the Witch King discovered references to an entity that even Sauron mentioned only in tones of unease. The black speech had no name for this being, referring to it only as the hunger from beyond. In the ancient scrolls of Numer, it was called the Unmaker. The elves of the First Age had named it Morana, the Dark Maker, and established rites specifically to ward against its influence. Most disturbing to the Witch King was the realization that the rings of power, including the 9 given to mortal kings, contained elements of this entity's essence. Sauron had not created the rings alone. He had drawn upon older, deeper magics, tapping into the void itself to enhance their potency. The price of this power was a thinning of the barriers that kept the Nameless One at bay. Every use of the rings, from Sauron's domination of his servants to Galadriel's preservation of Lothlorien, inadvertently strengthened the Nameless One's connection to Middle-earth. The more the rings were used, the closer the ancient enemy came to breaking through the walls of night. This terrible knowledge explained much about the Witch King's seemingly contradictory actions, his reluctance to seize the ring from Frodo at Weathertop, often attributed to caution or fear of Aragorn, stem from a deeper calculation. If Sauron regained the One Ring and achieved total domination of Middle-earth, the final barrier holding back the Nameless One would fall victory for his master, meant doom for all, including the rings themselves. Gandalf, for his part, carried a burden few in Middle-earth could comprehend, as a Maya, a spirit who had existed before the creation of the world. He possessed fragmentary memories of the void, and what dwelt there, these memories have been dampened when he assumed bodily form in Middle-earth, part of the limitations placed upon the Astari by the Valar. But in dreams and moments of deep meditation, echoes of that ancient knowledge resurfaced. He knew that the Valar themselves feared what lay beyond the walls of night. He suspected that his mission in Middle-earth, ostensibly to help the free peoples, resist Sauron, served a secondary purpose: to strengthen the fabric of reality itself against incursion from outside. This explained why the Astari had been forbidden from matching power against power with Sauron. Such conflicts thinned the barriers between worlds, creating opportunities for greater darkness to enter. The revelation that the Witch King possessed similar knowledge, arrived at through entirely different means, represented both danger and opportunity for Gandalf. Danger, because such knowledge in the hands of a servant of darkness could be catastrophically misused. Opportunity, because the Witch King's very nature as a wraith made him sensitive to disturbances in the fabric between worlds. He could perceive what even Gandalf might miss. Their meeting at Weathertop thus established a tacit agreement, never formalized, but understood by both. They would maintain their respective roles in the War of the Ring, Gandalf guiding the free peoples toward resistance, the Witch King commanding Sauron's forces in pursuit of the ring. But beneath these actions, both would work to monitor and strengthen the barriers against a greater threat. This explained Gandalf's 5-day absence after Weathertop. He had traveled to an ancient site in the Troll Shores, a place where the veil between worlds was particularly thin, to establish new wards using knowledge gained from the Witch King. It explained why the Nazgul, after nearly capturing Frodo on Weathertop, subsequently allowed him to reach the ford of Brennan when they could have easily overtaken him on the road. Most significantly, it explained a curious amendment to the prophecy regarding the Witch King's fate. The commonly known version stated that not by the hand of man shall he fall, but the complete text, found only in the private libraries of Eland and Galadriel, continued, "Yet fall he must when darkness calls to darkness, and the greater shadow stretches forth its hand." This prophecy took on new meaning in light of the secret pact. The Witch King's inevitable defeat was not merely fated, but necessary, a sacrifice that would temporarily strengthen the barriers against the Nameless One. His passing from the circles of the world would release energy bound up in his ring, energy that could be redirected to reinforce the walls of night. The Witch King knew this. Is question to the merchant on the East Road about the light on the western shore was not mere nostalgia for his mortal days, but a coded inquiry about the state of the barriers between Middle-earth and the undying lands, for it was from those lands that the strongest wards against the Nameless One emanated. Gandalf's response to this information shaped his subsequent actions in ways subtle but profound. His insistence that Frodo take the ring to Mount Doom rather than hiding or using it came not merely from fear of Sauron regaining his power, but from understanding that the ring's destruction would release its bound energy in a way that could be channeled against the greater threat. His willingness to face the Balrog in Moria, a confrontation he had avoided for centuries, stemmed from recognition that this servant of Morgoth might possess knowledge about the nature of the Nameless One. His instruction to Aragorn before falling in a shadow to look to the east carried a double meaning: watch for Sauron's movements, yes, but also for signs of disturbance in the fabric of reality itself. The White Council never learned of Gandalf's secret communication with the Witch King. Galadriel may have suspected her mirror showed many things, and her questions to Frodo about voices in the darkness hinted at deeper concerns than merely Sauron's return. Elend, Keeper of Law, stretching back to the First Age, maintained records of the Nameless One. In his private archives texts, he showed to neither his counselors nor the members of the Fellowship. As for the Witch King, his private agenda remained equally concealed from his master. Sauron focused entirely on regaining the One Ring and subjugating Middle-earth, dismissed the ancient prophecies of the Nameless One as irrelevant to his ambitions. The Dark Lord's pride would not allow him to consider that he might be merely a pawn in a larger game, that his very existence served the designs of a power greater and more terrible than himself. This deeper agenda, hidden beneath the visible conflict of the War of the Ring, explained many of the seemingly inexplicable decisions made by both Gandalf and the Witch King. It cast their roles not as simple agents of light and darkness, but as reluctant collaborators against a threat that transcended such distinctions. And it raised a disturbing possibility that the entire history of Middle-earth, from the creation of the rings to the final battle before the Blackgate, had unfolded according to a design neither the wise nor the mighty had fully comprehended. Perhaps most revealing was what transpired in the immediate aftermath of the Weathertop meeting. The rangers patrolling the area reported unusual phenomena. Throughout the region, flocks of birds flew in perfect circles for hours. The stars themselves seemed to flicker in patterns that caused even the most hardened warriors to avert their eyes. And most tellingly, for 3 consecutive nights, no living creature within 20 leagues of Weathertop dreamed. It was as if the very fabric of consciousness had been temporarily altered, a local ripple in the great tapestry of being. These effects could only be the result of powerful magic worked by both Gandalf and the Witch King together, combining light and shadow in ways neither was meant to be combined. Such cooperation between sworn enemies would have been unthinkable without the presence of a threat so great that it transcended their ancient enmity. The deeper agenda thus revealed was nothing less than the preservation of existence itself, a cause that united the wisest of the wise and the darkest of the dark in common purpose, even as they continued their visible conflict. For in this greatest of games they had discovered a terrible truth: they were not the players, but the pieces; not the composers, but notes in a greater symphony whose conclusion might be either transcendent harmony or absolute silence. In the hidden archives of Amades, maintained by Elend since the founding of that haven, lay a scroll written on material neither parchment nor paper, but a substance unknown in Middle-earth. Brought from Numenor before its drowning, the scroll contained writing in a script that predated even the Fëanorian letters used by the High Elves. This document, known to only a handful of the eldest beings in Middle-earth, contained what scholars called the prophecy of the Nameless. Unlike most prophecies which revealed potential futures or declared certain events inevitable, this ancient text describes something that had already occurred yet also lay in the future. It spoke of the creation of Auror, not as a finished act, but as an ongoing process, one that could be undone if certain conditions were met. It named the Nameless One not as an adversary of the valor, but as their shadow, the possibility of uncreation that gave meaning to the act of creation itself. Most crucially, the prophecy outlined 7 signs that would herald the Nameless One's attempt to enter Auror completely, to move from influence to presence, from suggestion to domination. These signs were recorded in language so cryptic that, even with all his law had deciphered only for with certainty, the first sign, the servant crowned with fire, shall seek dominion over all lands. This clearly referred to Sauron the Maya, who had become a dark lord in his own right. The second sign, 9, shall become 8, yet gain in power the reduction of the Nazgul by 1, yet a strengthening of their collective influence. The third sign, the dead, shall walk unaided by any master's call, not the barrel. The darkest moments, it reveals the true nature of prophecy in Middle-earth, not as mere prediction, but as a guideline, a framework within which free will could operate to achieve necessary outcomes, without sacrificing the moral autonomy that gave those outcomes meaning. The alliance between Gandalf and the Witch King was not friendship, not reconciliation, not redemption. It was necessity raised to the level of cosmic principle, the recognition that existence itself requires both light and shadow in balanced opposition. In their temporary alignment against the Nameless One, they embodied the fundamental pattern of order, not good triumphant over evil, but creation maintaining itself against the ever-present possibility of uncreation. The music continuing despite the discord woven through it. The secret meeting between Gandalf and the Witch King at Weathertop cast ripples across the entirety of the War of the Ring, altering events in ways both subtle and profound, like stones dropped into still water. Their cooperation created patterns of influence that extended far beyond their direct actions, touching the lives of all who participated in the great conflict of the Third Age. The most immediate effect manifested in the behavior of the Nine, following their failure to capture Frodo at the ford of Brunnen. Historical accounts describe the ring race as temporarily defeated, their physical forms destroyed by the flood, engineered by Eland. What these accounts fail to explain is why, upon regaining physical form, the Nine did not immediately resume their hunt for the ring with the same intensity as before. The answer lies in the Witch King's subtle redirection of their efforts. As their lord, he maintained significant influence over the other 8 Nazgul, even while respecting Sauron's ultimate authority. Following Weathertop, he deliberately focused their attention on military preparations rather than the hunt for the ring, insisting that building Mordor's armies took precedence over pursuing a single hobbit who would eventually come to them. This strategy served multiple purposes. It maintained the appearance of dedication to Sauron's goals, while giving the Fellowship crucial time to organize and depart Rivendell. It directed the Dark Lord's attention toward conventional warfare, where victory or defeat would not immediately trigger the conditions for the Nameless One's intrusion, and it allowed the Witch King to position his forces in ways that appeared aggressive, but actually protected certain key locations where the barriers between worlds were thinnest. Gandalf, for his part, carefully managed the Fellowship's journey to exploit these subtle advantages. His insistence on the route through Moria, long questioned by scholars as unnecessarily dangerous, takes on new significance when understood as part of their shared strategy. The ancient dwarf realm represented one of the deepest wounds in the fabric of Middle-earth, a place where the dwarves had delved too greedily and disturbed things better left undisturbed by passing through Moria and confronting the Balrog. Gandalf was able to establish new wards at this critical weak point. His death and subsequent transformation from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White represented far more than personal apotheosis, the process of passing beyond the circles of the world and returning granted him unique insight into the nature of the barriers and the movements of the Nameless One beyond them. It also allowed him to shed certain limitations placed upon the Estari, giving him greater freedom to act directly against the growing threat. The timing of his return coinciding exactly with the Witch King's departure from Minas Morgul to lead the assault on Gondor suggests coordination beyond mere chance. Both beings had positioned themselves to enact complementary workings of power at the moment when the war entered its most critical phase. The division of the Fellowship, often attributed to the corrupting influence of the Ring, served a deeper strategic purpose by separating into smaller groups, traveling different paths. They established a network of influence that strengthened the barriers at multiple locations. Simultaneously, Aragorn's journey through the paths of the dead Frodo and Sam's approach to Mordor through the paths of Sir Unnal and Gandalf's presence at Minas Tirith created a triangulation of power that stabilized the fabric of reality during its greatest stress. These movements corresponded precisely with the deployment of the Nine. The Witch King focused his attention on Gondor, drawing 7 of his fellow wraiths with him. The remaining Nazgul was assigned to guard Triangle, a position that placed it perfectly to monitor one of the thinnest points in the barriers. This distribution, while appearing to serve Sauron's military objectives, actually established a mirror counterpart to the Fellowship's own triangulation. Perhaps most significant were the effects on the One Ring itself. Both Gandalf and Witch King understood that the ring represented the greatest potential breach in the barriers, a concentration of power specifically designed to dominate wills and reshape reality. Its destruction had to occur in a precise manner to avoid causing the very catastrophe they sought to prevent. This explains both Gandalf's refusal to take or use the ring and the curious lack of all-out pursuit once it had passed beyond Rivendell. The wizard knew that touching the ring would link him directly to it, creating a connection the Nameless One could potentially exploit. The Witch King, meanwhile, ensured that the pursuit remained threatening enough to keep the ring moving toward Mount Doom, but never so overwhelming that its bearer would be forced to use it in self-defense. Their hidden influence extended even to the seemingly random chances that repeatedly saved Frodo and Sam on their journey, the timely arrival of eagles, the momentary weakening of vigilance at crucial borders, the convenient positioning of allies exactly when needed most. All these coincidences form part of a pattern established during the meeting at Weathertop and maintained through subtle communications throughout the war. The confrontation at the Black Gate represents perhaps the clearest example of their cooperation. Gandalf's strategy of drawing Sauron's attention away from Mount Doom appears on the surface to be a desperate gamble. In reality, it was a carefully calculated move timed precisely to coincide with events the Witch King had set in motion before his fall. The remaining 8 Nazgul, no longer under the direct control of their lord, should have been positioned to guard Mount Doom itself, the most obvious target for anyone seeking to destroy the ring. Instead, they were deployed elsewhere, leaving only ordinary guards who could be overcome by two exhausted hobbits. This inexplicable lapse in security can only be explained by the lingering influence of the Witch King's final commands issued with the foreknowledge of how events must unfold. The moment of the ring's destruction marked the culmination of their shared strategy. As Erodin erupted and the foundations of Barad crumbled, the energy release could have torn the barriers irreparably, creating exactly the opening the Nameless Ones sought. Instead, this power was channeled along pathways established by Gandalf, and the Witch King actually reinforcing the boundaries between worlds at their weakest points. This channeling manifested visibly as great cracks opening in the earth, swallowing Sauron's armies and structures. What appeared to be mere geological upheaval was in fact a deliberate restructuring of the physical realm to better anchor it against incursion from beyond. The destruction wrought upon Mordor, while devastating, actually prevented far greater devastation that would have extended beyond Middle-earth to the fabric of existence itself. The aftermath of the war revealed further evidence of their cooperation. The rapid healing of blighted lands, the unusually swift reconstruction of damaged cities, the renewed fertility of regions long barren. These were not merely signs of evil's defeat, but manifestations of strengthened barriers between worlds. The natural order, no longer strained by pressure from beyond, reasserted itself with remarkable vigor. Most tellingly, the dreams that had plagued sensitive individuals throughout Middle-earth, strange visions of an eye rimmed with stars, sensations of vast hunger beyond the walls of night, ceased entirely following the ring's destruction. The Nameless One's influence, while not eliminated, had been successfully contained for another age. The ripple effects of the Weathertop meeting thus extended to every aspect of the War of the Ring, transforming what appeared to be a straightforward conflict between good and evil into something far more complex, a carefully orchestrated rebalancing of cosmic forces, a reinforcement of reality's foundations at the moment of their greatest vulnerability. Neither Gandalf nor the Witch King lived to see the full manifestation of their work. Gandalf passing over the sea with the last of the Elder, the Witch King falling on the fields of Pelennor. Yet the pattern they established continued to shape Middle-earth long after their departure. This hidden dimension of the war remains unrecorded in official histories, unknown to all but the wisest of the wise. Yet its effects touch every tale of the Fourth Age, every song of renewal and rebuilding, every peaceful year granted to the free peoples after Sauron's fall. For in the secret meeting between sworn enemies and their temporary alignment against a greater threat lay the preservation not just of Middle-earth, but of existence itself, the continuation of the great music despite the discord woven through it. The true legacy of Gandalf and the Witch King thus lies not in their visible opposition, chronicled in songs and stories throughout the ages, but in their hidden cooperation, remembered only in whispers among the highest circles of law masters. It is a legacy that challenges the simplistic view of good triumphant over evil, revealing instead a more profound truth that creation requires both light and shadow and balanced harmony, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not through the defeat of one's enemies, but through the recognition of common cause with them, however briefly, against threats that transcend all mortal conflicts. The time has come to draw together all threads of evidence to unveil the complete picture of what truly transpired between Gandalf and the Witch King at Weathertop, and why the consequences of their meeting reverberate through the history of Middle-earth. Even beyond the end of the Third Age, what follows is the forbidden truth assembled from fragments scattered across ancient texts, hidden references, and the observable patterns of events that cannot be explained by conventional understanding of the War of the Ring. At the heart of this revelation lies a cosmic reality seldom acknowledged in the chronicles of Middle-earth, the existence of the Nameless One, an entity older than Ardor itself, neither good nor evil as mortals understand these concepts, but rather the embodiment of uncreation, the void from which all things emerged, and to which all things might return. This entity existed before the music of the Aenir was present as a silent potential during the creation of the world, and has remained beyond the walls of night ever since, separated from the created realm by barriers established at the foundation of existence. These barriers, while powerful, were not impregnable. They could be weakened by specific actions within order, particularly by concentrations of power that distorted the natural order. The rings of power, especially the One Ring, represented precisely such concentrations Sauron, in his pride and ambition, had unknowingly created. Tools that served not only his desire for dominion, but also the Nameless One's potential entry into the created world. Both Gandalf and the Witch King, from their vastly different perspectives, had glimpsed this terrible truth. Gandalf, as a Maya who had existed before taking physical form in Middle-earth, carried fragmentary memories of the void and what dwelt there. The Witch King, through his transformation into a wraith existing simultaneously in the physical and spiritual realms, had developed sensitivity to disturbances in the fabric of reality. Both had independently come to the same conclusion: the War of the Ring threatened not just the freedom of Middle-earth's peoples, but the continued existence of Middle-earth itself. Their meeting at Weathertop was no chance encounter, but a deliberately arranged conference between representatives of opposing cosmic forces, temporary allies against a threat that transcended their ancient enmity. What passed between them that night was not merely information, but a binding pact sealed with powers beyond mortal comprehension, establishing a framework for cooperation that would remain hidden beneath their visible opposition. The first element of this pact concerned the Nine-Ring Wraiths as extensions of Sauron's. Well, they served as conduits for his power throughout Middle-earth, but as beings caught between life and death, they also created natural weak points in the barriers between worlds. The Witch King, as their lord, possessed limited ability to modify their behavior and positioning. He agreed to deploy them in patterns that would minimize damage to the barriers, focusing their activities away from the thinnest points in the fabric of reality. Gandalf, in turn, committed to guiding the Fellowship along routes that would allow for the strengthening of these same weak points. His seemingly inexplicable insistence on certain paths, often questioned by his companions, served this hidden purpose: the journey through Moria, the visit to Loth Lorien, the division of the company at Ammon Hen. All these decisions positioned the bearers of hope exactly where they were needed to reinforce the barriers through their actions and mere presence. The second element concerned the One Ring itself. Both understood that its destruction was necessary, yet also potentially catastrophic if accomplished improperly. The concentrated power within the ring, if released suddenly and chaotically, might tear open the very barriers they sought to maintain. The Witch King provided crucial information about the ring's underlying structure. Knowledge he had gained through his own binding to a lesser ring of the same design. Gandalf used this information to plan precisely how the ring should be unmade. This explains the wizard's insistence on secrecy and stealth rather than direct confrontation. It clarifies why he rejected suggestions to use the ring against Sauron or to hide it away indefinitely. The ring had to be destroyed at a specific location, Mount Doom, in a specific manner by the voluntary relinquishment of one who had claimed it. Any other approach risked creating the very breach the Nameless One awaited. The third and perhaps most significant element of their pact involved the Witch King's own fate. The prophecy that not by the hand of man shall he fall had long been interpreted as a protection, a limitation on who could defeat him. In truth, it was a prescription defining exactly how he must be defeated for his passing, to strengthen rather than weaken the barriers the Witch King knew he must fall. His continued existence as a wraith represented a persistent wound in the fabric of reality, but his destruction had to occur in a very specific manner at a specific time and place by specific hands. Only then would the energy bound within him be released in a pattern that reinforced rather than damaged the walls between worlds. This knowledge explains his seemingly erratic behavior during the War of the Ring, his hesitations and unexpected withdrawals, his focus on certain targets to the exclusion of more obvious ones. He was not merely pursuing Sauron's objectives, but carefully positioning himself for the prophesied encounter that would transform his defeat into the greatest victory against the Nameless One. Gandalf, understanding the necessity of the sacrifice, worked subtly to ensure the prophecy's fulfillment. His encouragement of Edwin, his positioning of Merry within the forces of Rohan, his strategic advice to the captains of the West, these actions, while serving immediate military objectives, also served to guide the Witch King toward as necessary in the full implementation of their pact unfolded throughout the War of the Ring. Invisible to most participants, yet decisive in determining the ultimate outcome, the visible conflict between good and evil, between the free peoples and the forces of Mordor, provided cover for a deeper cooperation against a threat that would have consumed both sides equally. This cooperation manifested in several key moments that have long puzzled scholars of Middle-earth's history. The flood at the Ford of Brennan, attributed solely to Elrond's power, actually combined elven magic with dark enchantments established by the Witch King himself, creating a barrier specifically tuned to repel the Nameless One's influence, rather than merely the physical forms of the ringwraiths. The journey through Moria, seemingly a desperate choice, forced by adverse conditions, allowed Gandalf to confront and bind not just the Balrog, but deeper, older entities stirring in the foundations of the mountains, entities that responded to the Nameless One's growing influence. The Battle of Pelennor Fields, presented in chronicles as a straightforward clash between the forces of Gondor and Mordor, incorporated elaborate magical workings embedded in the movements of troops, the timing of charges, even the positioning of fallen warriors. These patterns, visible only from above, strengthened the barriers directly beneath. Minas, the city built atop one of the thinnest points in the fabric of reality. The confrontation at the Black Gate, apparently a diversionary tactic to draw Sauron's attention from Frodo and Sam, served the additional purpose of establishing a massive focusing pattern, the arrangement of forces, the timing of engagements, the very formation of the armies created a lens that would direct the energy released by the ring's destruction along safe channels rather than allowing it to tear randomly through the barriers, most significantly the moment of the rings. Destruction itself became not just the defeat of Sauron, but the resealing of ancient barriers, the reinforcement of the walls between worlds at precisely their weakest point, the cataclysmic eruption of Mount Doom, the collapse of Barad-dûr, the earth opening to swallow Sauron's armies. These were not merely the physical consequences of the ring's unmaking, but manifestations of cosmic rebalancing, the visible effects of barriers being renewed through the released energy. This forbidden truth transforms our understanding of the War of the Ring from a simple tale of good triumphant over evil to something far more profound, a moment when the very foundations of reality were at risk, when representatives of opposing forces recognized their common interest in existence itself and cooperated to ensure its continuation. It reveals Gandalf and the Witch King not merely as enemies, but as reluctant collaborators in the preservation of a world that required both light and shadow to maintain its integrity. The implications extend beyond the end of the Third Age into the dawn of the Fourth, the departure of the Eldar, the fading of magic from Middle-earth, the gradual transition to the dominion of men. These changes, often attributed to the natural progression of ages, actually represented necessary adjustments to strengthen the barriers permanently, the concentration of power that had made Middle-earth vulnerable to the nameless. One was deliberately dispersed, spread thin enough that it could no longer serve as a potential breach point. This dispersion required sacrifices from all the free peoples. The elves relinquished their timeless realms and departed over the sea. The dwarves scaled back their delving into the deep places of the world. Men surrendered access to certain forms of power and knowledge, accepting limitations that would protect them from inadvertently weakening the barriers again. Even the hobbits, returning to their peaceful shire, carried forward subtle patterns of behavior and tradition that maintained a small but crucial portion of the overall warding. The most poignant sacrifice came from the ring-bearers themselves. Frodo's inability to reintegrate into the Shire, his continuing pain from wounds that should have healed his eventual departure over the sea. These were not merely personal tragedies, but necessary consequences of his role in the cosmic rebalancing, having carried the ring and stood at the center of the resealing. He had become permanently connected to the barriers themselves, a living anchor that both strengthened them and suffered from that connection. Gandalf's departure with the last of the Eldar similarly represented not merely the end of his mission in Middle-earth, but a final strengthening of the barriers. As a Moria, his very presence represented a concentration of power that, while beneficial during the crisis, could become problematic in the new equilibrium. His return to the West completed the pattern established at Weathertop, the final move in the great game played against the Nameless One. The Witch King, having fulfilled his part through his fall on the Polano fields, achieved something few would have thought possible: a measure of redemption, not forgiveness for his centuries of evil, not eraser of the suffering he had caused, but purpose found even in darkness, significance discovered in necessary sacrifice. His passing released the energy bound in his ring, not chaotically, but in precisely the pattern needed to strengthen the barriers. At a critical moment, this forbidden truth challenges our conception of good and evil in Middle-earth, revealing a cosmic reality more complex than simple moral opposition. It suggests that the structure of existence itself requires both creative and destructive forces, both light and shadow. In balanced interaction, the defeat of Sauron did not represent the eradication of darkness, but its realignment, its restoration. To its proper role within the great pattern, the secret meeting between Gandalf and the Witch King at Weathertop thus stands revealed as one of the most significant events in the history of Middle-earth, though unrecorded in any official chronicle. In that brief alignment between sworn enemies in their recognition of common cause against a threat beyond comprehension lay the salvation not just of the free peoples, but of existence itself, the continuation of the great music despite the discord woven through it. This is the forbidden truth, hidden for ages, whispered only among the highest circles of law masters, preserved in fragments scattered across text, separated by time and distance. It reveals the War of the Ring not merely as the end of the Third Age, but as the preservation of all ages, the moment when the pattern established at the foundation of order was renewed for another great cycle of the world. As the Fourth Age unfolds and the memory of earlier times fades into legend, this deeper understanding remains embedded in the very structure of Middle-earth, in the patterns of stars overhead, in the flow of rivers, and the songs sung by those who remember nothing of their origin. For the barriers stand renewed, the walls between worlds strengthened, the nameless one contained beyond the circles of the world. And though few remember how or why, all who dwell in Middle-earth continue to exist because of what transpired between light and shadow upon Weathertop, when enemies became allies against the greatest threat of all. The next time you hear the tale of the War of the Ring, remember this hidden dimension, this secret collaboration beneath the visible conflict. Look beyond the simple narrative of good triumphant over evil to perceive the more profound truth that existence itself precedes moral alignment, that preservation sometimes requires cooperation between the most unlikely allies, and that the greatest victories may come not through the defeat of one's enemies, but through the recognition of common cause with them against threats that transcend all mortal conflicts. This is the forbidden truth finally revealed, the secret meeting between Gandalf and the Witch King at Weathertop, and the cosmic consequences that flowed from their temporary alignment against the hunger beyond the walls of night.